get our fiscal goals. They're live. We are live. And we are going to get a fiscal note and see what Ezra's take on this. I know this has been a little challenging, but let's see what we've got and then we'll see where we can go.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Ezra Holden, Joint Fiscal Office. Would you like me to share my screen?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you. So, Budget Council has given you a very thorough walkthrough of this bill. Joint Fiscal is focused on two sections of this bill that we believe would have fiscal impact. So, first of all, we will start out with Section 4, which is the change to the current use program. So, under this section, the definition of agricultural land and farming for current use enrollment would be expanded as Budget Council laid out for you all. And so broadening these definitions would increase the number of properties that could enroll. Now, data on this being the equine space, since it's an unregulated industry, it's pretty sparse. So due to this and the unpredictability of individual behavior, it's a choice to enroll in current use. Even if you have the option, that doesn't mean you will enroll in current use. We can only estimate a range, and as we feel it is our role in the office, we went with a more conservative, higher range because we don't want to underestimate something that could have.
Surprise down and surprise up.
Yeah, so we don't want to say something's de minimis when it turns out to be the maximum. So here we are.
Oh, I like that. No, I don't like that.
Is that a real word?
Good word, but we don't want to use it. It is now.
I like it.
So we're estimating that the overall fiscal impact in fiscal year 2028 could be between 4.6 and 10 million. Within this range, anywhere from 1.3 to 2.8 million is estimated to be the increased general fund uses from the hold harmless provision in current use. And then approximately 3.3 to 7.2 million in estimated reduced education property taxes from current use enrollment. All else equal, that reduction in education fund revenues would result in the increase of education property tax rates, both homestead and non-homestead.
So that, yeah.
And then also, actually, I'm going to skip over the second section since it sounds like there's a conversation going on around what's actually being impacted by the sales tax exemption. So we will.
What did you assume when you did yours?
So I can't take credit for that. That would be Ted Barnett.
Oh, Ted Barnett. Okay, so we'll skip over it. We can get to you, and then okay. So let's go to the sections you did.
Yeah. So Section 4, the equine farm was mine. Here's a table to kind of give you a sense of low and high end estimates. And so Bradley went through kind of the eligibility and how you could enroll, but we can just go through that again. I think that would be helpful. So this would amend the definition of agricultural land in current use to include land used for equine farming, which is also defined in this section. Parcels would be eligible to enroll in current use for equine farming if at least one of the following provisions is met. So it could be that an individual in one of two or three of five the prior calendar years earned at least 2,000 in gross income from equine farming on a parcel with fewer than 25 acres.
That's earned. That's not profit, right? If I charge you $500 to board your horse, but it costs me $700, that 500 is counted towards mine, not the $200 loss.
It's gross income.
It's gross income.
And if your parcel has more than 25 acres, you would need to earn an additional $75 per acre for each acre above that 25, with the amount you need to earn limited to 5,000 from equine farming. Or you can enroll if the parcel is owned or leased by someone who qualifies as an equine farmer, which is Bradley teed up. It's amending the definition in this section of a farmer to include equine farmer, a farmer. So 50% of their income is from equine farming. If that makes sense. So those, in equine farming, I believe this was mentioned, it's equine farming, the definition requires the individual to own or board at least 4 equines to be considered.
And the problem is we don't know how many of those there are.
Right, so the data is pretty limited. I use the 2022 National Agricultural Census to try and get an idea of how many farms there are with horses or equines, and there are over 1,000 with at least 1 equine. And that's a limited data sample because that's an agricultural census targeted to find farms. So if you are an individual who owns 4 or more equines, but your primary business is not necessarily farming, you may not be picked up in an agricultural census. So there is a known unknown when it comes to the data here. And as I understand it, you would, as long as you have the 4 horses and are making $2,000 from those 4 horses, and you have fewer than 25 acres on your parcel, you could fall under that first provision there for enrollment, which is one of
really low amount.
But they still have to make half their income from it. Isn't that true?
I defer to the Ledge Council on.
Can you repeat the question?
Well, I mean, the chair was talking about, 2,025 acres, that's not very much, but
Yeah,
they would still have to have over half their income from that.
there's 2 pieces there. One
Yeah.
is the agricultural land, and then the other piece is the farm buildings. And so to be eligible to enroll in current use for the farm buildings, you need to be a farmer. And farmer is defined as having half of your income derived from equine farming. And so, but the agricultural land, the land itself, might be taxed at the current use rate, if it meets those requirements.
I think we've been told previously in this committee that the real value on farms are the buildings, not the land.
Typically.
And
Right.
gee, the horse barns in Kentucky they look better than my house. They're pretty luxurious. And then there's some that are out, that are little more than shacks.
And that's a nice segue to talk about how current use values the 2 different pieces. So in current use, land is assigned a use value, and that's set statewide every year. So the use value for an agricultural land is 537 per acre in fiscal year 2026. So you would still pay some taxes, but it would be based on this use value, not fair market. However, farm buildings are assessed at 0% of their market value. So if you meet the definition of farmer, which is at 50%, you can then enroll the buildings you use for your farming. So if you are an equine farmer, I guess that's where you could see which buildings fall under equine farming. And that's not my determination. That would be a tax department determination.
Right. I mean, you could be boarding and have an indoor riding. Yes,
And the indoor riding rink would be taxes.
it would be taxes.
Right. So the 2 pieces of this are the education fund impact. So again, if your land is being assessed below fair market value, your education property taxes are going to be less than what they would be otherwise. Since we have a statewide education fund system, you're squeezing the balloon. I think Julia likes to use that phrase, and if you're squeezing it here, it's gonna pop out somewhere else with the education fund property
Right.
taxes,
It'll go into the rate.
the general fund. So the general fund implication comes from municipal taxes. Municipal taxes are also reduced by current use. There's a hold harmless provision so that municipalities are held harmless by the state for their reduction in municipal taxes. So if your municipality has an equine farm that enrolls, you would see a reduction in municipal property tax rates. The state would give you a general fund, hold harmless, and that would therefore reduce the general fund.
That was one of the Act 60 legs of the stool.
So
Senator Maddows.
So Ezra, on your numbers up there, is it safe to assume the bulk of that is the buildings?
So when doing my estimate, the buildings were estimated to be more valuable than the enrolled land, partly because of the fact they're being valued at 0%,
Oh.
and the land still has some value. It's just artificially reduced. I will also note that depending on how this rolls out and who's affected and the determinations made, not everyone who would enroll under this would necessarily have a farm building enrolled with them. So that's an area where the estimate is more de maximis than what may actually take place with the ground.
And then-
Because it depends on, so it's a range, right? So not everyone.
And do you have any idea of like the agricultural land? I'd imagine some equine farms are already rolled in current use. Is there any? Sounds like there's not a ton of data for it, but I'd imagine some of this land's already in current use itself.
Right, which is why we went with a range, because not every property with an equine
Yeah,
would be if they enrolled, would be a new entrant. But the data is pretty sparse. It's a non-regulated industry. The tax department doesn't have great
Yeah.
information as well, and it's a hard estimate
it's a hard.
to be really specific.
Wouldn't most of the farms have buildings? Because most of them would have at least a barn or something
Barn.
for the horses to live in. So,
Tackling.
I mean, some of them there are varying fanciness, as the chair said, but,
But if they're not farms or half their income doesn't come from that
No.
as well.
Very few
But,
people.
Like if they just have 4 horses.
My grandfather had 4
They're not making
horses
any
and
money.
3 acres. He had a house,
They
he
don't-
had a
Half the
Ours
revenue
would-
comes.
4 or 5 stalls. That may be a quarter of an acre. Best. And he could, depending on what he went to the horse auction, he would have 4 to 6 horses there. But it wasn't a lot of land.
Bring it in.
Hmm?
Bring it in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, very
I
few
hate-
horses live.
Yeah,
off
just off,
track.
just off the race.
Yeah. So you don't need the space.
Yeah.
For horses that you do for cows, that
First,
I assume eating grass has something to do with milk and taste. Yeah. And so, yeah, there are probably some horses in the summer that live off grass, but a lot of they can be grain fed and in fairly small. And so it's under 25 acres.
but some farms have lots of acres of
Yes,
pasture land, which is.
Yes.
So,
they do.
But-
I'm trying to. I mean, this just is not the year to put a $7 or $8 million hit on the ed fund, so I'm trying to think of a way we might tighten this, either with acreage or
I always think of it as, and that, I'm not an expert on current use, but I'm told that current use right now is about an $80 million expense for the state of Vermont, either in education, property taxes, or what we get back to the municipality.
More than that.
I think it's more than that.
You think it's worth
If
it?
this will be a
Maybe you're right.
$7 million hit,
Yeah, maybe you're right. I mean,
Do you know, Jay?
I thought it was like, I heard it's like.
You're looking it up.
Yep. That was right around the amount of property that's right. Maybe no.
I don't think so. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But anyhow, my point is that if we have, however much we devote to current use right now, I'm almost thinking like, do you do something where you live within that? So you're not expanding the current use program because dealing with what qualifies. That way the education fund doesn't take a hit and the general fund doesn't take a hit.
I mean, I wasn't here when the originally was current use, but the idea was towns will appraise at highest and best use, which is generally development or land that is open and developable. And that was putting farmers, and in this case, it was traditional cow farmers in Vermont who also generally grow corn and for silage for their cows. Hay, and we did that, and the goal of the state was, and we did forestry because they were traditional industries and they kept the land open. But it was generally bigger tracts of land with cows. I'm concerned about, I don't want to exempt somebody's pony in the backyard that they pony horse, but prize money for jumpers or barrel racers, you could hit $2,000 if you've got a good horse.
I don't know a lot about current use. What I'm wondering has it traditionally been for like commodity production of like milk, hay and timber? And is this a new area? Because I see horses as services, it's more in the boarding, training and lessons area. So are there current uses that are comparable to what we're doing with horses, or is this setting a new precedent?
So I don't know if I can speak on setting a new precedent or not. I would just say that, yeah, you have agricultural land. You also have reserve forest land, which is preserving the forest to achieve full growth. So that is land that would not necessarily be turned into timber later on. But I can't speak on if this is a new precedent or not.
Does old forest usually come with public access contingencies?
I can't speak to that.
I mean, current use was started originally as a land conservation to keep land in its current use, which was agroforestry land.
Tax that current use, not development potential.
Right, and to make it to make sure that the land was conserved for that purpose. And it was about, as the chair has said, like large tracts of land
And there was a
to save them. No, it was a land conservation program. And it has been really successful at doing land conservation, and it has grown over the years. It's added on to various things, like the thing that Ezra just mentioned, the forestry that's for old growth. We added that a few years ago. So it's been added on piecemeal in some ways, but it was primarily a land conservation was the purpose of it, and it has been successful at doing that. But the impacts are that it impacts both the general fund and the education fund, and so it's sort of a trade-off on what. And then, of course, it's beneficial to farmers and their ability to be financially viable.
Going to have to move on. I think a solution might be if we could find. I don't want to break in my grandfather's 3 acres with his 4 to 6 horses. and call that current use. I want, if we can find. Start with the larger where this really is a business and not the family avocation.
Not for pets.
No. So anyway, let's think about that, but we've got 2 more bills to do, so I can get you out of here, so we do a committee conference.
Tom is here.
And Tom is here.
While y'all are switching, sorry,
Yes.
Ted Barnett, Joint Fiscal Office for current use, the total value is $77.9 million in total tax savings. This is from the PBR annual report in 25. And then the municipal tax savings are 21.9 million, and the education property tax savings is 56 million. For current.
So 77. Okay.
77 total between the two funds.
Sorry.
And we will. All right. We're gonna go on. That one we're going on to, let's vote something out of here. Okay, this is an act relating to terminating testing the schools in Vermont for polychlorinated biphenyls. CPs. Yeah, and this bill proposes not that we do away with it, but we push the date out. I think we've all received some letters from schools saying that it's expensive and they don't do it. My concern is, we know there's a good possibility it's there in some schools. And if we just say, well, it's expensive, so we're not going to test for it. What's our legal exposure? I'm hoping I'll get 2 more out.
Sounds good.
By 4. It has to be by 4. Okay, so that I think was the question.
So for the record, Todd Delos, Assistant Attorney General. Nice to see you all this afternoon. Broadly on the policy front, we support where this committee appears to be taking the PCB testing bill. As I think.
We don't know where we're taking.
Well,
it.
right.
No, it's
Thank you,
the house.
I was looking at the version
It's the house version. They didn't stop it. They delayed.
and the latest version. Thank you, Senator, for that clarity.
Yeah, we have made no decision. The stops,
The house stopped
it.
it.
And then
It came to us. Somewhere that it's been natural resources maybe, but it hasn't been, it's been pushed out. See if I can find the bill.
I'm looking at version 4.2
That's probably it.
from April 27th.
$542. Here it is. Okay, yeah, it's under Michael O'Grady.
This is the Senate Education Committee version.
Okay.
Yeah, and it moves it to August of 31.
Moves it to restart.
All school subjects shall test for on or before, so it moves the deadline out, which gets us up into the new school system. And we can go over that, but I guess yeah, I mean,
So to speak to, we would support moving the deadlines out. As I think you all know, our office sued Monsanto, who's the sole manufacturer.
that was the other thing we need to know is there money coming to do this? Okay,
So happy to give that detail and then I can get back to your initial question. So we filed the complaint in June 23. There was some motion practice.
And we defeated a motion to dismiss, we amended the complaint, and we're currently in the litigation phase of discovery. So there's a lot of documents exchanging hands, and we're building a case. At this point, I think the case management has a trial date for this coming March, so March of 27 is when we would look to be at trial. I can go into a little bit more detail of what that trial might look like in terms of what it's going to cover, but it's not the entire complaint, which really is going to deal with schools, obviously, with natural resources, meaning waterways like Lake Champlain and Hoosick River, as well as other sites that may be contaminated, potential punitive damages for knowledge and continued use of the product, and then any potential other costs. So there's quite a bit in the breadth of our lawsuit. And we would be looking at, as I said, a March 2027 trial date as we move through.
Okay, that's what I asked you to just, have there been other trials or other?
Yeah, and I have sort of what the internet would tell me.
Okay.
So this is not secret proprietary attorney general information. This is what the internet says. So, and I want to be really clear, our lawsuit is very broad. Because we see the damages and the harms done by the use of PCBs and the manufacture of PCBs as being very broad. Other states, so when I give you these sort of numbers, I want to be really clear. I don't think it's apples to apples across the board. Some are looking at state-only buildings, some are looking at natural resources, some are looking at schools. And I don't have quite that level of detail, but just by way of comparison, New Hampshire in 2022 settled for about $25 million just for state-owned buildings. Ohio in 2022 was 80 million on a broader scale. Oregon in December of 2022 is the sort of way out there biggest number, which is almost 700 million for a very large, broad-based litigation in a bigger state than one. So I couldn't tell you, and it would be inappropriate for me to sort of give you a benchmark for what we think Vermont could see in this. Obviously, it's in litigation, and so until we have a settlement or a jury verdict, we're not going to.
But we're not pinning our hopes on pie in the sky. There is legal precedent for settlements. And so if we move this date out by 31, we will probably know if we have money to continue the testing and remediation.
I would say we feel confident in the case that we have. We feel confident in the allegations we put in the complaint, and we feel very comfortable litigating the case all the way through. And with a successful completion of the case, some monies would come back. That flags for me. There is one little tweak we would ask for in whichever version you're looking at to just make sure that recoveries flow the right way based on how the case is lined up. And I think that's in a version that Mike O'Grady, it was, I can talk to Charlotte about, but
Okay,
you have the language on your website.
we have the language.
It's draft 4.2.
And this is the Finance Committee Amendment draft 1.1 from April 20.
Okay.
We have a financing amendment on that though.
This is what sits on the documents page is a little tricky because a lot of them are referred to as draft 1.1, but then that directive is draft 4.2.
Okay.
This
I didn't
one,
know we had-
I'm looking at the actual header.
Yeah.
You want to see.
Well,
Okay.
so can I ask a question? about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
So one of the things that, there's obviously a debate about whether we continue to require schools to do this testing. The schools that have not been tested, whether we require them to get tested, because we don't have money for any of it. So it's a huge unfunded mandate for our school districts to do this. And it's extremely disruptive. And we all know that PCBs is really bad. And so we don't want to have a health, problem in our schools. But if we don't have the money to do it and it's really disruptive to school districts, then, there's a question about whether we should continue this program in the House. We said we should not. one argument I've heard for continuing it is if we stop doing it, that impedes the lawsuit in some way. And could you speak to that?
We're gonna continue with the lawsuit. And we believe that we've got the grounds. It doesn't change for us, the damage that exists, the evidence that we have demonstrating knowledge and liability. Those remain from our perspective, as alleged in the complaint, very clear, and that's what we plan to carry forward.
So if we were to stop the program where it is, you still have sufficient, it wouldn't impede the lawsuit.
I'm gonna just go back and say, you know, we feel strongly about
Okay.
where we're
And this is active litigation.
Because I think either we need to extend the deadlines a lot more than 5 years, because we're not gonna have the money, or the schools are not gonna be able to do this in 5 years either.
Well, in 5 years is when all the other consolidations, remember, we required testing if you were going to get any kind of a school construction grant.
Yeah, if your building was before 1980, which is what this is all
Yes.
based on, yes, we put it in there as to sort of like dovetail that. But that aid is not gonna be available for at least 5 years. So to have this deadline be 5 years from now is gonna be hard for school districts, because all this stuff is gonna just be coming online then. And even then, we're not gonna have enough money to cover all the costs of this, even if we are somehow to get.
Close some schools.
I mean, that's possible too, but I'm just wondering if we're gonna continue this on, if we could extend the deadline even further and just take some of that pressure off of school districts.
Okay, committee thoughts.
I would support that.
Extending the deadline for what again?
That testing that
That makes sense.
Requiring.
So further than it's extended in this bill.
If I think this takes it out to
31.
2031, if you could go to 2036. That just gives them,
I was thinking 35.
okay,
You said 5 years. The existing is, but you want to go 5.
5 years past that, because 2031 is when we're just gonna be getting to the new stuff and the new funding, the potential new funding, so. Come on.
I'll play along.
Can we agree on 2035?
I'm agreeable with 2035.
All right,
Sure.
agree to that?
This is a possibility. The only thing that's in the back of my mind that I've just been doing a little paper research on is there any risk that Monsanto will go bankrupt before it gets to our settlement? And when you're in line for civil litigation, that is a potential risk. At this point, it looks like the risk is low to moderate on the one hand, overall, but they've got a number of other, there's a number of other pieces of litigation that go beyond just PCB. They've settled a number of things. They certainly haven't settled everything that's out there. So the longer the time, the greater
Yep.
potential risk, depending on what happens between now and then.
Well, the lawsuit's going forward.
Yeah, the
lawsuit.
I look at the law part of the file.
Yeah. So we want them to be able to go as quickly as possible, but we don't wanna stress out schools.
Who's our draft?
Just one question. Susan.
Yeah.
Just along those lines, Todd, let's just say hypothetically Monsanto did go bankrupt and they're reorganized.
Mhm.
I mean, does that absolve any? I mean, I think they'd still be liable, wouldn't they?
I think there are just a lot of contingencies within that hypothetical. We would certainly press for their liability, absolutely. It would depend on what reorganization was.
They're not just automatically off the hook. Okay.
All right.
But it just depends on all the other things that are in that sort of pile of chapter
Now,
11.
we want to extend that date
He would be a.
to August 1st, 2035. Okay, we'll get that drafted. And we will roll that out tomorrow.
Can I beg
Yes,
just the small amendment?
Yeah.
From draft 1.1 from April 28th, which is really just a clarification of litigation recovery funds.
okay. I've got draft number 4.2. Has Michael gotten this?
Yes, he drafted this.
Okay,
It would be a Senate Finance Amendment. It's
What does it do?
1.1. It just clarifies language on page 2 of draft 4.2, lines 12, 13, and 14. Which is about recovery.
okay, any recovery by the state for any claims for damage caused by PCBs except recoveries to natural resources, which is that your amendment?
So the amendment is somewhat different. It would say any litigation recovery by the state for the cost of addressing PCB contaminations in schools, because this is really about schools. As
Okay.
opposed to exempting natural
So
resources.
you, send that to Charlotte and she could send that to Michael.
So do you want to incorporate the state in with that?
And with that amendment,
Will there be a separate fund for natural resources?
So it's a great question. The litigation, the way it's rolling forward is taking a sample of 6 schools plus just 2 natural resources, namely Lake Champlain and the Hoosick River, and bifurcating the trial based on that information, setting aside all of the additional claims, additional schools, additional sites, additional natural resources damages to see how that plays out. So there could be lots of other recovery outside of that.
Okay,
Part of the concern
So-
is not having all recoveries from all litigation to the schools when the way it was drafted in 4.3 suggests all recovery, and we're suggesting the
oh,
school
and so we'll go
recovery.
to natural resources.
And it will be parsed out like that. Clearly,
Which will,
if there is a settlement.
well, we would aim to have a global settlement if a settlement were to happen. I can't speak to any of that process, but the litigation is just divided up as opposed to doing litigation on all PCB contaminations across the state. It's taking some representative sample, which is these 6 schools plus Lake Champlain.
I don't believe we've ever gotten a settlement that the legislature hasn't gotten involved in how it gets dispersed.
Yeah,
So we may be counting our Christmas presents
okay.
too soon. But we will get that in, that's clarifying, and we will extend that date. And Michael will get that to us tomorrow, and we will vote this out, okay? Okay, thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, committee, we've got one more bill, and this is a must-do bill, I think, this year. Which is, we've taken quite a bit of testimony on it. It's 527, it is extending the sunset of 30 VSA 248A. This is the cell tower siting. I was the director on this one.
is it?
I think it's Maria, isn't it?
Up on the board.
See if
What number?
It's Ellen, isn't it?
5.7.
Yeah, Ellen.
it's Ellen. I think Ellen should agree to join us. But I'm trying to get the pleasure of the committee on this one. Are we, I mean, if we do nothing, it goes back to 250. If
I'm inclined to extend the sunset. I'm open to something less than 4 years, unless we get put off 4 years.
the House bill as it came to us extends it for 4 years.
3 years has typically been typical.
We have been doing 3 years, yes, in general. I think we've maybe done 2.
I'm amenable to 3 and outside of the bill, I do think there's work that needs to be done within the 248A process. And I put that on my list of things to work on in the House session, if I come back. But I'm not ready to make any changes to 248A right now.
What's the point of changing the 4 years to 3, let's say? What are you trying to get at there?
We've always done 3, I find that 3. That's, 4 is not a deal breaker for me.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
What do you say?
Nothing else. What came from the house has this other section too.
That's what I'm
saying
looking
you're
for.
supportive, not supportive of that?
Greg, you want to come up and
Yeah.
talk to us?
Sure.
There's a whole, is this the one that has a whole workshop in it?
Two workshops.
Two workshops.
So for the record, I'm Chris Baker with PCC. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So section 2. Yeah,
You're looking at draft 1.1 here. No, I'm sorry.
I'm looking at the ad.
Okay.
It's not much.
It's just as passed by the House.
Yeah, so section 2 is right on page 1 there, and basically it has us doing two workshops for some reason on the same topic, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, if we're going to do a workshop on certain topics, you can do the workshop. And that's that. I don't know what to do. We've done these studies a lot. The last one I just sent over to Charlotte. It was done in 2024. Yeah, and that study did basically the same thing. They went around the state, listened to towns, listened to folks. They didn't come up with any recommendations. We didn't come up with any. We think the process is working okay. So let me just step back a little bit. Tell you what would happen if this does sunset. And I know you folks are not in favor of sunsetting it, but if it sunsetted and went to the towns in Act 250 as opposed to 248A, it would be a huge change for the towns. So keep in mind, we get 140 of these applications a year. The vast majority are small ones, but in a rural town with a small select board and planning commission, that's a big deal. And there is a federal law which allows providers to sue towns unless they act within 60 to 90 days. We don't want our towns and municipalities getting sued. And it'll be hard. It'll be a huge transition process because this will sunset in 5 weeks. So all of a sudden they'll start getting applications which they haven't gotten for 10, 15 years. So it would be a huge change, not to mention the knock-on effect to Act 250 and the environmental court, because all of these things will get appealed to the environmental court. So we think the process is working okay. As I said, we need 140 applications a year. Typically, 2 of those are opposed, which means they actually go to a hearing. You heard about one case, the Lake Willoughby case. You heard people involved in that case. They happened to not prevail in that case. But that case went on for a year. There's ample time for those folks to participate, bring all their evidence, bring all their witnesses. In the end, it turned out that the commission found that the project met all of the criteria. And they did not prevail in that case. That happens. Other cases, the other side prevails and we deny the application. So for us, from our perspective, the process is working exactly how it should be. I understand when people lose a case, they're upset. And they want to blame the process, but in some cases, it's just a lack of evidence in their favor. Yeah.
And it sounds like in a couple of them, the select board said one thing and then changed, and
Well,
but if we went away with it, it would put more on those select boards, the ones that don't have any staff and are 3 to 5 to 7 volunteers.
The testimony I heard from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is that they are largely in favor of doing away with the sunset entirely. They like this process because it creates a lot less work for them, obviously. And it gives them a tremendous amount of say. Now, keep in mind, towns are given substantial deference in these hearings. So all they have to do is recommend that a project be denied. And that's a huge obstacle for the petitioner to overcome.
Typically towns stay out. The Lake Willoughby case, the town basically didn't make a recommendation either way. But each case is different. And as far as the report goes, I can't emphasize enough how many times we've done these reports, and we bring them back and people say, yeah, we're going to make some changes. It just doesn't happen. And you're free to make changes next biennium. We would be happy to participate in that. You don't need a report to do that.
Yeah.
You've heard everything you really need to hear. So I would, doing 3 to 4 years, I mean, we would recommend doing away with the sunset and just treating it like any other statute. Like the statute that we approve solar plants under. There's a lot of controversy over those. People get upset about those. It's the same complaints, and there's no sunset there. There's no reports being done even on that, which it's strange. But doing it for 4 years is fine. We'd rather see it done away with, but at this point, it would have catastrophic impact. So anything you could do to extend this would be, we would recommend it.
That's a good question on that point. So I'm fine with 4 years, I'm fine with 3 years, but if it were to go away, what would that do differently? Are you holding back from formalizing anything or behaving in a different way because of this jeopardy we continually keep you into the sunset?
It does. It keeps us from doing rules. Yeah. I mean, we have standards in place. We've never gone through the formal rulemaking process because of the sunset. It's not necessary. I mean, the standards are fine.
3-year sunset, it takes you a year to go through.
Exactly. So we don't do it. So that's the one thing that we haven't done. And also it stops conversation over here, because every a couple of years we come over here, we start looking at the sunset, and the reaction is the same. It's like, well, we think there's a problem. We want to do a fix, but it can wait until the next sunset. And we've gone through it many times.
I'm not familiar with the rules process as much. Does that involve a lot more public input as well, that you've not yet gone through rules with this 248A?
We have adopted standards and procedures.
Okay.
And that was through a contested case proceeding. A formal rulemaking goes through you folks. That will go to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. So
And
it does
it
take.
goes through, there's a professional, review by state employee, at least general rules. There's department does it, then other departments, there's an internal, then there's a public input session.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's a final recommendation.
It takes almost 2 years to go through the.
To do the whole thing, and if we're gonna sunset it in 3,
Then we just.
does it make any difference?
No, I'm not saying that's a huge hindrance, because we do have standards and procedures in place.
Yep.
And those are easily changed if we need to.
I'll just say I'd support 3 years, I'd support 4 years. I'd also support repealing it just to have it go through that more, it sounds like, fairly thorough process.
I have served on administrative rules, I have chaired it. I have never, the only time you get a problem is when they come in and they recommend a rule that the legislature specifically said don't do, or that, but it is, like wake votes. It is generally, through the process. I don't think you'd come out with anything a whole lot different, given the way this comes back every 2 years. There's as much public input as you can get. And
I'm really mixed on this. I'll just be honest. I heard a lot of testimony. I've heard from a number of constituents who have real concerns about how this process does not work for individual Vermonters who may be impacted by the siting of cell tower. And I think the vast majority of your cases are just these little add-ons to existing cell towers or changes, some kind of change, swapping out antennas. So those are not a problem. Those are existing cell towers. And it seems to me like y'all should be in charge of those swap outs. That's not a big thing. But when you're siting a new cell tower, the impact of it is a land use impact, and it impacts all of the people who live near it. And that's what the Act 250 process is for a large scale land use thing. And I think it's weird that this one went and that is in charge of the PUC. And maybe I hear you that it's working for you. You're on one side of it. And maybe it's working for some towns, but if a town fails to participate at the beginning, then they're just sort of out, and
There are deadlines.
yeah, and so then individuals who find out later that there's an impact to their property, then they're not able to take part in the process. And so I do feel really concerned about just continuing on with this program or this process that doesn't seem to be working for everybody. And now it's working for some people, and it's hard to get a process that works for everybody. I know all this. And I agree with you, Senator Beck, like this seems to be like, we have to actually look at it more closely and try to figure out a solution that works for people. But I'm just, I don't like to have a sunset date that we continue to sunset. And I hear you also about the report being kind of useless, that you've done it before and probably you're going to do the same thing again and say like, we don't know. But I'm really torn.
But
I'm not sure what to do on this bill.
there's another element in here, and when we eventually started, it's public safety. It's your ability to reach E911. I told you I have relatives that live in the gorge, and there was no cell service. If I split off the road, I'm gonna be really annoyed and I have been literally stuck up to my waist in snow with my cell phone in my hand and no cell service, and realizing I could be in danger.
Totally understand that. I got into a car accident in a place where there was no cell service, but I think the issue is not whether or not we have cell phone towers. It's whether we are siting them in the appropriate place and having an impact on the natural resources in the area and the people who live in the area. And we've heard from the people who live in many of these areas that this process isn't working for them. And so I'm concerned with just saying, let's continue with the same process. I understand that saying, okay, we're going to not do this process would create havoc right now, but having some kind of ramp to a new process rather than just a continuing sunset would maybe be better. And saying, okay, this being more explicit about what happens, so that, I don't know.
It doesn't being more explicit about what.
Well,
because I've already asked if we could put a 1,500-foot setback in. That seemed to be the thing we're not allowed to discuss concern. And we've been told that would not work, like when you're putting it in a church steeple or a silo, which is where we want them, where no one sees them. But it's in a church and there's people sitting there. And so I think the reason for the sunsets is we've been trying to figure out the process, and it is that public safety versus the individual, the public goods versus the individual desire. And there are, and we have reports from the department of large swaths of this pitch. We made a pitch to the feds to get more fiber because
That's different. Fiber,
no,
not
but I mean,
cell towers.
it is towers, it is service. We did, this was phone service. They had us walk, if you had one house that had phone service in their big block, they did the whole block. And we actually drove around with a cell phone, the department did. And there are people, there are schools. When we lost the small cell, the Bose, remember the little Bose? I think Randy, you were here.
But I don't think getting rid of this process means there wouldn't be cell phone towers. It just means there would be a different process for
I'm
approving
not
them.
sure yet, but I have 5 minutes to get things out of here because we're leaving.
Just to,
Okay.
maybe move things along. I'm fine with the bill. And I also agree with Senator Beck that it needs more work and I would support the 3 years as well.
Okay, can we agree that we would do this for 3 years and take out the studies? I believe it was, they take a lot of time, a lot of money and a lot of personnel. And maybe the personnel would be better off working on solutions than studying. Would that,
That's fine. I just want to make one comment. Just want to make sure my comments were misinterpreted. I have confidence in the PUC doing this correctly. But we make the rules, and if we've made rules that are making your life more difficult or setback rules that are making communities' lives more difficult, I just want to address that. But I have confidence that the PUC is correctly applying the rules that we put in place.
so we straw poll. 3 years, take out the studies. Okay.
I would say also that the one thing that I would, and this is probably less necessary to put in a written decision or suggestion, if you will, by us, is to suggest to the PUC to take a very careful look at the interaction between the PUC in dealing with complaints of like this or about these kinds of situations with your customer base. Because I think we have all heard from time to time that you're losing your customer base. People increasingly are mad at a system they don't think is working well for them. And we can put in something to change it right now, which I don't think that we're not prepared to do. Or we can say, do it in 3 years, but if in 3 years, it's the way it is today, we will all fail. And so I think there's a real opportunity for you to intervene now as a department and say, how can you make this a more user-friendly process?
We're constantly trying to adjust.
So I'd say just extra effort so that when we're back here in 3 years, that the decision may not be the same.
Okay, I'm gonna